Okay, hi everyone. This is our sixth iteration, I think, of meeting with professionals in political communication, either faculty or professionals working for nonprofits around the world. And this time we have Irmak Taner from how is your organization called?
Apathy is boring.
Yeah, aren't we all in agreement with that, right? Especially for the young generation. Apathy is boring. So I have here um, um, a small note about Irmak. Just a moment. So I can open it here. Yes. So first of all, the organization, their story on their website on apathyisboring.com goes like this. Apathy is Boring was founded in 2004 when a choreographer, a filmmaker, and a fashion photographer met at a party. Troubled by how few of their friends were actively participating in Canada's democracy, Ilona Doherty, Paul Shore, and Mackenzie Duncan started an online campaign to mobilize youth to vote during the 2004 federal election. Today, we work year-round to support and educate youth to become active and contributing citizens in Canada's democracy. Our vision is a Canada where every young Canadian is an active citizen and youth are meaningfully engaged in all aspects of the democratic process. This is more than just voting. It is about setting up youth to find their lane for engagement and ultimately take charge of the conditions they live in. Um, yeah, well, I think we all need something like that, especially in the United States and of late. Um, let's see something else. So about Irmak. Irmak was born and raised in Istanbul, Turkey, and has been living in Montreal for the past 10 years. Her curiosity about people individually and collectively led her to a degree in psychology and international development studies at McGill, followed by a graduate degree in anthropology at Concordia. She believes in the power of community organizing, and as an aspiring artist, she is always looking for ways to bring arts into action. She has worked in various academic and nonprofit contexts, organizing workshops and events, bringing people together and facilitating connections. In her free time, she likes to experiment with upcycled crafts and lay down at parks. There's on their websites for each person a personal quote. And she says, when I first got involved in Apathy is Boring as a volunteer a few years ago, I was just so impressed. The positive energy, the empowering spirit, and the capacity for change that Apathy is Boring brings forth for youth is infectious, and I am so thrilled to be part of this family. Well, welcome, Irmak. And well, can you tell us a few words about yourself, about what are you doing with Apathy is Boring? And then maybe we can go through the questions from the students.
Yes, for sure. My name is Irmak, as Professor Nastasia has said. I've been working at Apathy is Boring for the past 3 years, exactly this month. And um, our organization has been around for 20 years. We actually have a 20-year birthday anniversary party coming up in November. And it started by, as he mentioned, three friends coming together, being bothered by the fact that none of their friends were involved or cared about the upcoming elections that was happening in Canada. So, in general, we work specifically in Canada in the Canadian context. While we have partnered with organizations in other places, our focus is in Canada. So, everything that I'll be talking about refers to the context to that context. But I hope that it will maybe prompt some questions or reflections to look back into your context and how that there could be parallels and differences, and if there's questions that maybe hold the same weight. Um, so I did have a little presentation, but you actually covered some of it. So maybe I'll prop it up just so we can have like a bit of a thing to look at. And also, I would say we are a pretty visual organization in that our social media presence is very strong. I feel like we've used colors
Yes.
to really get our message across. Even if we don't go through everything, I think it'll give a sense of our vibe as well and how we do things.
Yes.
Okay. Um, let's see.
Yes, we can see it.
It's great. So we actually recently went through a big visual identity change and revamp in our colors and everything with our 20th anniversary. We were getting a lot of feedback that our old colors were a little difficult to on the eye and was very neon and like bright. This was a feedback we got and have worked on to change, which kind of connects to wonderful questions, by the way. I was reading all of the questions this morning. It really touches on visual communication, and political communication is not just the words, right? Like everything that's included in it. So that was something that we kept in mind moving forward. And this is kind of where we came to now. This is a photo of our team. Some folks have changed, but this was from the last time we were all together as a team in Montreal. Our head office is based in Montreal, though we have staff working across the country. Our programs were running in 7 different cities, Vancouver, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, and Halifax, for those who are familiar with Canadian cities. And um, our office is based in Montreal, so that's where most of our staff works.
I lived 6 years in North Dakota, which is 2 hours from Winnipeg,
Oh, I
in
didn't know
Grand
that
Forks,
was.
North Dakota, at the
Wow.
University of North Dakota. Yes.
Okay. Um, a little icebreaker that I think also now you have the answer to, but wanted to see for an icebreaker. One of these is wrong. Do you know which one it is? And can you drop it in the chat which one you think is incorrect? Yes, that is correct. The third one is wrong because it was um, a photographer, sorry, a fashion photographer, a choreographer, and a filmmaker. Um, and we did tour with Ariana Grande during the 2019 elections in Canada, which I'll kind of get into later. I don't want to spend too much time on this part, so we have enough for all of the questions. But the basis of our work is rooted in strengthening democracy in Canada and making sure that youth voices are central to that effort. This means recognizing youth as individual and powerful political actors. And democracy, as you probably are familiar with it, is the political governance where power of the people is sorry, it's a way of governing which depends on the will of the people. It comes from the word demos and kratos, which means power and people, literally. The framework we use in the work that we do to kind of make sense of this larger structure is this one. It helps us kind of think about how democracy as a process also links to the things that are essential to us and how they can uphold each other. The 5 pillars are inclusive, equitable participation, accessible information and media institutions, peaceful coexistence and the right to protest, barrier-free access to human rights, and free and fair electoral processes. The free and fair electoral process is what most people think of when you think of think of democracy, the elections that happens once every 4 years or 5 years on various levels of government, municipal, provincial, or state, on federal. But it's a lot more comprehensive than that. And that has been one of the big shifts that has happened in our organization in the past 20 years, where it started really focused on how can we get the youth vote out? And that was the goal, really just showing up to the polls. But over the years, our work has grown beyond that in recognition that once every 4 years is not enough. And the texture or the way in which the fabric of a democratic society works is so much more than just that one day of voting, which is why a lot of the programs that we run right now has come to life. I'll come to our programs at the end, but this is happening in the context of a specific political climate. Again, this information is based on the Canadian context, but I'm curious what your thoughts on in reflection to what your political context is. And this is where historically the participation of youth have come down. It compares much lower to folks in other age groups. There is generally a distrust in institutions, and a strong sense of barriers to participation, which can be described as a political crisis in political culture. These two, yeah, this represents the turnout difference between the two age groups, which is a very significant difference. And actually, in municipal to federal, that also varies. For example, the federal election turnout in the last election was about 65 to 70%, or 70 to 70, if I can't remember, around 70% in Canada, whereas in Montreal, where I'm based, the municipal election, the turnout rate was 45%, which is less than 50. Technically, less than half people showed up, and that was still counted. So that makes us think how much engagement and how many voices are actually lost in that moment of decision making. I encourage you to check out the election results for your own local area as well, because municipal elections are often the ones that have the most direct impact into our lives, whether that's governing how the garbage collection works, or how the schooling system works, or how the roads are made, or the transportation system around you. And this is an avenue through which there can be a lot of direct impact, but somehow is greatly under facilitated or utilized in civic engagement spaces. Um, Here we see some of the examples of different barriers that has come up. And
I posted some statistics about youth involvement in elections in 2022 in the United States per state.
oh,
It's much lower
okay.
than in Canada.
Um, and in a 2015 study, they found two major areas of barrier to engagement. One of them was motivation based, and the other one was access based. So access based could look like you're working and you can't take time off to go vote, or you're a student and where you're actually living is different from your permanent address, and so your registration information goes to the wrong one. The other one is there's not enough information being disseminated in the atmospheres that you're in, whether that's school, the polling station is not accessible to you. These kind of more logistical or structural things that actually make it difficult for you to go out and do the voting, versus motivational ones being things such as my vote is not going to make a difference, or politicians don't care about what I think, or I don't actually care, or voting is not the best way I want to express my political will, which all are valid and sentiments that shape our political culture for a reason, um, which has been informing the way that we have kind of tried to build our way of engagement that moves away from the sense of um, youth as people who need to be guided, to youth who are full political individuals that hold power, that have a right to exercise, and have their own unique ways of engagement, that's whether that's social media or other youth movements or protests, and those being valid ways of also being politically engaged. And how can we break this cycle of like disconnection? And doing this through not leaving anybody behind and having everyone involved. And that's kind of the base of the work that we do. We really try to think about what can be the barriers of access to not only democratic participation, but also involvement in our programming. So thinking about first point of entry as something that we pay attention to and one that we try to be mindful of making space for. So if you're somebody who's never had volunteering experience or haven't really participated any kind of civic engagement events or any kind of programming that we do, that's completely okay. If not better, because the goal is that you don't have to have any past experience to get things started. Everyone needs to take their first step at one point towards something. And so how can we take that first step, make that first step easier for folks who want to do something? That's really the goal because everyone has a voice and everyone has something to give. This is done through our framework of youth-led democratic innovation that sees it as an ecosystem of participation. So you have to have the movement leaders, those who go onto the streets, those who raise awareness about issues that they care about. And you also need creative organizers who are maybe working in a capacity of like creating solutions or bring people together. But you also need people in decision-making positions. Maybe there's a very young city councilor in your community who has picked up on a project that their friends have started and scales it to the community level. How can we utilize different roles within our society? How can youth be in those different roles and how can those roles work together? Which we used to call shakers, makers, and uptakers. Now we call them youth as movement leaders, creative organizers, and decision makers. And coming to our programs, all of this happens through our programs, or at least that is the aim, where different facets of participation can come into play in different programming. Vote, as understood by its name, is focused on bringing out the vote. And this is including folks like organizing in their own cities to go out and talk to people, ask them questions about voting and encourage them to vote, organizing pledging events. Table topics, this is a project that I'm personally working on, is around building spaces so we can have conversations about politics and have the tools to converse about them because it can get difficult, it can get uncomfortable. These are all based on our lived experiences and how can we make it so that we, as young people, have the space and also the skills to get into those difficult conversations. Build is a program that is focused on advocacy, not on a specific topic, but if you care specifically about, I don't know, transportation, how can you understand the systems around you better so that you can go and advocate specifically for the cause that you want to advocate for? RISE was a program that we ran for 5 years that focused around bringing groups of youth together to organize together and create a community project, building skills on collective decision making, collaboration, time and budget management as a collective. And the feed is a newsletter that we send out weekly that kind of summarizes the Canadian politics for that week and makes it into like an accessible format that you receive every Wednesday morning, which I really enjoy as like a wake up thing in bed to read, you know? So that's kind of a very quick summary of who we are, what we do, how we do it. These are some visuals from past events that we've organized, some of the community projects that people have come up with, some photos from our campaigning during the elections a couple years ago. And that is all. This is all of our social media information if you want to take a look at any point or reach me through this email. And I'll stop sharing so we can get to the more interactive part.
Okay, I wanted to ask you from the very beginning,
Yeah.
what is the arrangement of politics in Canada? How many parties do you have and how viable they are? Because, for example, in the United States, no party is really viable apart from the Democratic and the Republican Party.
There are more parties. Um, I wouldn't be able to count all of them by heart right now,
Okay.
but I guess the biggest parties historically have been the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party, the NDP, New Democratic Party, and there's also a party that's specifically out of Quebec because the way that Canada is set up, the provincial party, Quebec has had somewhat of a different history than the other provinces, and its politics come into play in a different way.
The
In
French speaking part.
exactly, Quebec's official language is French, whereas in Canada, both are official languages, but generally the rest of Canada predominantly speaks English, whereas in Quebec it's predominantly French. So that comes into play differently. But there's the Green Party, but I guess in terms of vote distribution, the biggest parties being the three that I mentioned.
Mhm. So for you, you have the organization like in Europe, where the prime minister has the who has the biggest political function, right? Bigger than the president, right?
Yes, yes. And the way that we are positioned in relation to that is that we are strictly nonpartisan, which means that we don't support a specific party or political leader. Um, our focus is really focused, our focus is on youth as a group and their role in the political space and the civic space.
How many seats are in the parliament?
336, but you know what? I'm gonna fact check myself on this.
Right. So we believe you. But usually when the parties come to power after elections, do they have to do alliances in order to be able to govern?
Do they have to do
To
what? Could
do
you repeat it?
alliances
A
between
coalition?
coalitions.
Depends. If they've been elected as a majority government, no. So if they have more than a certain number of seats in the parliament, then they can govern by themselves because that means they have enough seats in the parliament to pass certain bills on their own. However, right now we have a coalition government between the Liberal and the New Democrats. So in the next elections coming up, that could change. And if a coalition is broken, a re-election could be called.
Mhm. And do you have parties that were formed around new issues that count for the modern world, like the Greens or something connected to, global warming?
A great question. The Green Party has been around for a long time, though there recently has been, and I'm forgetting their name because they're so new, like maybe a month ago, a new party was launched. Their focus is not necessarily climate, but it's more evidence-based politics as they've described it. Um, but it's very new and I'm not too familiar with
And
their platforms in various things. Our elections are supposed to be next fall in 1 year. We'll see how that goes.
so ballpark number, how many parties are there in Canada? About 100, about 200? Is it in a range of
Mm,
tens or hundreds?
In a range of tens, definitely
Ah,
not in a
ah,
range of
ah.
hundreds.
Okay, I understand. I understand. Is another question that stems from the classes that we've been through recently, in analysis of political communication. Um, is lobbying allowed by law in Canada?
Yes. And there's regulations around it. Yeah, yes, the answer is yes.
Okay. And is this creating, in the eyes of the public, any problem with the elected politicians or? like, sounds like bribery, sounds like some people can be influenced too much by economic interests.
It depends, like it works differently on different levels, federal and provincial. There is a sense of how transparent those lobbying processes are and what the regulations are around it. There have been instances where it gives off a sense, but I don't think I would be able to speak on behalf of like the Canadian public how they perceive the lobbying. But from my own experience, I do think there needs to be more transparency um, around how it works
Mhm.
and how the processes actually affect the outcomes. If there's like um, how, for example, how are lobbying groups registered? What are the rules that govern their behavior, whether that's a civil group or like a political or a corporate group? Um, but the lack of transparency does create a sense of distrust when
Mhm.
that is the case.
And I'm sure you can find out in the news, like it happened recently in the United States. A senator, a Democratic senator was asked to resign because they found him with, gold bars from institutions in Egypt and so on and so forth. The mayor of New York is asked to resign because he had kind of shady connections with organizations in Turkey in order to give them the rights for a hotel in the
Yeah.
center of New York, and he received, payments through traveling first class to Istanbul and many other instances like that. So, are these cases like that of political scandals because of undue influence of economic interests with the life of politicians?
There was one regarding a construction development project in Ontario with the Premier of Ontario that was going to start developing an area known as the Green Belt that is protected. And I mean, I can send resources like links about this to go into detail, but there was questions on how legitimate what were the influences in deciding to allow this development and who it would go for, etc., and whether that was done in an integ with integrity. Yeah, like if the process was done as it should have been.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Then, should I switch to the questions from students? Since last night when I sent you the questions, I think one or two more students participated questions. So I guess I have a more updated list.
Okay.
And I'll go with just the first question from each of them because there's like 12 contributions or something like that.
Yeah.
So I have a student from a former Soviet country, from Turkmenistan, by Muhammad Baltayev, and he was asking, what are the most effective strategies for enhancing youth voter participation through political communication?
Yes. I'm also just pulling it up. Um, the way that we think about it is for first and foremost, meeting youth where they are at.
Mhm.
Not expecting them to come to you, but going to where they are. So this can mean in terms of like literally going where they are. And as example by the Ariana Grande concert, if youth are going to concerts, to festivals, then maybe we go to the space that they are to talk to them instead of waiting for them to come to us. This could also mean not so literally physically, but thinking about the language that we use, how accessible our information is. Are we using a way of communicating that resonates with the age group that we're working with, which for us is 18 to 30? Um, so the language of communication, how we communicate that, what the spaces that we choose to be in accordance with who we're trying to reach, emphasizing the value of youth voices within themselves and also being realistic in the way that we talk about it. Let's not pretend that there's no like there's no real reasons for the lack of participation or different ways of participation sometimes. So how can we actually recognize the barriers that exist and how can we work towards getting through them together rather than pretending like they're not there.
Okay. Thank you so much. The next question comes from one of my students who's an exchange student from France, actually from the Normandy area, Ines. And she's asking, and I will post the question here in chat. With the increasing presence of misinformation and fake news in today's media, how can organizations like Apathy is Boring effectively educate and engage voters, ensuring that they make informed decisions?
Great question. Misinformation, disinformation is generally something that um, our team, specifically our executive director, is very passionate about. And within our capacity, the 2 points that we see as points of intervention are one, creating tools and capacity for youth to be able to navigate those spaces. So that could be tools around media literacy. And there's one actually on our website. And the other one is creating accurate and accessible content. So the feed is an effort in that direction where we're recapping Canadian politics weekly in an accessible way that links to reliable sources so that you can go then read further on the things that you care about. Similarly, around the elections time, and there's a couple provincial elections coming up in Canada right now, which is what we're working on. We create social media content around them, linking to sort the reliable sources. So, for example, with the BC British Columbia elections coming up, one of the things that we've done is do a platform survey of different parties. What do each party officially stand on regards to major issues? Here are some links that you can check out to see what they exactly said. So, kind of creating pathway of like, this is in summary what it is, but these are the sources that you can go check out to form your own opinion about it. So really encouraging critical thinking, research on our end and also on their end to form their own opinions and not take things as face value. Um, but there's always so much more to do. There's definitely more room and more need areas for us to do more work on this, specifically around navigating the media landscape, which is increasingly more complex and difficult with introductions of new technologies and AI, and as you said, deep fakes. Definitely, I think there's more to do in that area.
Mhm. This is my question. Do you have media aggregators like Mother Jones in the United States that people consider maybe not to be so biased because, for example, on news channels, CNN, MSNBC versus Fox, they are considered at opposite poles. With a bias either towards the Democrats or towards the Republicans. So. For example, your newsletter that you were talking about, how many
Mhm.
people are consuming your information, and do they ever consider that you maybe include a bias in your newsletter, or it's considered unbiased?
Um, the effort is for it to be as neutral as possible. I don't know how it's perceived, but we do have a feedback form at the end of each one where people can write their feedback on it. And so that we can integrate that because it's a continuously iterative process that I think is actually at the core of participatory democracy, even though this is obviously like a very, very, very small example of how that feedback system could work. But we work with a journalist who creates the weekly news um, recap. And so at the end of each newsletter, there's a form. And so if some of the readers have thoughts on specific things, they can drop it in there and we actually read them and take that into account. And in terms of the readership, it's a few thousand, but less than 10,000, about 5,000, I think, in total.
Yeah, which is not a bad number in the very busy market of news nowadays. Okay, let me move to the next question from Aya Dahu. How did and maybe some of these questions were meant knowing that we might be meeting both of you and Mrs. De Torres, I mean. So maybe this question is not necessarily for you, but let's see. How did your experience as a project manager help you in coordinating field and survey data collection, particularly with Francophone clients?
Uh, I do feel like this is referring to my resume.
Okay.
But that working in the Francophone company was my first time doing project management. So it was actually where I built a lot of the skills. Um, and how that really helped was building my own confidence and capacity and developing those skills that I hadn't gotten a chance to exercise all that much before. And also, French is my third language. So it was really a space in which I learned to be okay with making mistakes and moving forward, even when that's the case, and being in an environment that is understanding of that and that, accepts that we all make mistakes and that's how we learn and grow. It was a Quebecois company, so the language of communication was at baseline French, and that was a huge learning curve for me.
So by the way, when you send these newsletters, for example, or any other piece of information, or you post something on your website or on your social media, do you have to translate everything in French and put both versions?
Yes, as one of our biggest funding sources is the government of Canada, we're mandated to communicate in both languages. So when we're sending out a newsletter, there's an English version and a French version. Our website has an English version and a French version. All of our official communications has both English and French.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's switch to the next question. It's a question from a graduate student, Julia Donato. Based on your experience coordinating field research and presenting reports to predominantly Francophone clients, how do you approach adapting your communication style to different audiences, especially in a multicultural context like Canada?
Great question. I will say that I'm no longer in the communications team also, but they're all interlinked. In my outreach position, I was in the communications team. Currently, I'm in the research and development team. They do work hand in hand. A lot of the research that comes out of our team feeds into the other parts of the organization. But attention to language is a huge one. Um, in the way that we speak. So identifying who we're speaking to and what is going to be the best way to engage with that audience. And that is for us 18 to 30. The French and English aspect is a big part of that in Quebec without actually including a French communication, you would be excluding a huge part of the population and a huge part of the people in this province. Um, in terms of Canada is very multicultural, and there's a lot of allophone people, which means their first language is not English or French, including myself. There on our end, we are open to very understanding of that. In terms of resources, we don't necessarily have the capacity to generate our content in more than two languages at the moment. But as much as we can, we try to share those that happen. So, for example, during the elections in Quebec, this was really great to see. They had, and this is the case in a lot of provinces, they create the information relating to the elections processes in upwards of 10 languages, depending on what those languages in their constituency are. So if we can find those resources, we try to amplify them as much as we can, even if we can't ourselves produce them. Um, Anything else? In terms of, yeah, I would say, yeah, that's the main thing. And showing the effort really counts, even if we can't do it all the time, recognizing that even just by words is important. If we're hosting an event, for example, and the speakers are all going to be speaking in English, we try to get a translator for French. And we try to include in our events what the language of communication in that event will be, if we're able to accommodate any translation. If we can't accommodate, then it's noted so that people come into the space knowing what to expect, and that they have been thought of.
Yeah, interesting. And out of curiosity, for example, in the province of Quebec, even the ballots for voting for issues are in French.
I think it's both, but I've never voted. I just became a citizen a couple months ago. So I will see.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I have two daughters who are students now on the East Coast, and they are voting for the first time. So, but we are here. I live in Missouri. I teach in Illinois, and they had to ask for voting from a remote location, but it took time to receive the ballot. And now it's a very long one for November 5th because it's with issues, with changing of judges, with amendments and this, and it's like, 75 issues to vote on or points to vote on. It's a very long ballot printed on both sides.
Yeah.
Okay, moving to the next question. It's a question also from a graduate student. He is Andrew Doncor. He comes from Ghana. So he was asking, considering your experience in communication and outreach strategies, what specific tactics or strategies would you recommend for political campaigns to meaningfully engage young voters?
Actually, we have a branch of our organization called Youth Friendly that specifically does consulting with other groups on how to engage youth in the work that they do. So I would primarily direct them to our youth friendly initiative. Secondarily, more specifics of it would be one, being aware of moments when you might be tokenizing a youth voice and making sure that your engagement is not in that nature, but one in genuine engagement and participation. So this could mean if you're bringing in youth to consult their opinion, or there's team members and you're bringing in their voices, how is that actually going to be carried out? Giving examples of like, okay, we're getting this feedback. How will that feedback actually be implemented, rather than having the point of, oh, you're here, we're listening to you, and then that's not really thought about and it's kind of just like put aside, which happens very often, not just with youth, but in consulting different groups' opinions, specifically with youth too. How is their engagement and voice meaningfully getting integrated into the work that you do? Communicating that, maybe following up, making them part of the process as a whole as much as possible, rather than just one small part of it and then, excluding from the other aspects. These are a few things that come to mind, but for more comprehensive um, approach, I think you can also check out our website for Youth Friendly, which is a separate website than our actual organization's website.
You were mentioning earlier that you just recently became a citizen, so you will vote for the first time. But I see that you don't speak with an accent. Did you study English in Turkey too, or what age did you come in Canada at?
I came to Canada when I was 18.
Oh, so I guess you studied English in Turkey?
No, I mean, my schooling was in Turkish. I did learn English in Turkey
Right.
As a second language, but
Mhm.
I didn't study in English until I came here. And then I have been here for 13 years now.
Okay.
It's been 3 years since I wrote the thing for the website. So, yeah, I've been here for 13 years.
Well, congratulations. I can't sense too much of an accent. But I studied English in Romania from second grade to the 12th. Then I was a teacher of English. Then I studied in English, and it's a different story. How long is the process to become a citizen in Canada? 6 years?
Depends on the route you take. My journey was that I was a student and then I had a temporary work permit. Afterwards, I applied to be a permanent resident in Quebec, which is the equivalent of a green card. And then after becoming a permanent resident, there's a specific number of days you have to be in the country to be able to qualify to apply for citizenship. Um, and then you apply for the citizenship and then you get it. So mine took 11 and a half, 12 years. Um, but there are instances of shorter and there are also instances of longer processes.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's interesting to know. I remember in the 90s when, a whole generation in my country was trying to make a better life for themselves. I know former colleagues and relatives were trying to go to Canada, and at the time it was advertised in Romania as, come to Canada. If you have $6,000, you become a citizen. I guess those were the rules in the 90s, but they changed.
Yeah, immigration processes change very quickly, even just government to government.
Yes, yes. I have here another but shorter question from a student who is originally from Mexico, David Garcia. He says, what are some skill sets needed to be a program manager?
Great question. Being organized is a big one because you're keeping track of multiple things going on at once and you're responsible to make sure that they happen. So you're not doing every task yourself, but you're making sure that those tasks are done. So you're in a position kind of liaising. And for that, you also need open communication. And this is a skill that gets built through practice. There's a team of people who work most of the time, it could be depends on the project, but if there's multiple people working on the project and your role is to make sure that all of those things happen at a specific time in a specific way, then making sure everyone in the team is communicating to each other. Everyone is on the same page with each other as to what's supposed to happen, and that's okay with everybody. So holding a space of open communication, not with yourself and others, but also among everybody, and being organized in the way that you structure the work that you're doing or all the things that need to be done or the timelines everyone can see clearly. Um, and that all of those timelines interact with each other in a smooth way because one thing links to the other, links to the other, links to the other. So to get to that end goal, um, what are the things that need to be done? That was kind of wordy of an answer, but I would say those are the two really important things I find to have a smooth process within a team to get to a place.
I'm very happy that you are emphasizing communication because I come from a department of applied communication studies, but my students come from mass communications, applied communication studies, international studies, and integrative studies. So it's a good mix. Thank you very much. I have here another question from a student called Cody Hoffer. He asks, how has volunteering previously helped you out with your current job and navigating different jobs?
Building confidence, building skills, and building connections. Those were the main things. Even, um, yeah, in a very short way, building my own confidence that I'm capable of doing the things that I want to do, building skills in various things because a lot of them are very translatable. What led me to get the job here when I was first starting out in the outreach position was a job that I had in graduate school in the lab that I was working in as a coordinator. So I could show that I've done communications work, sending out newsletters and organizing events at our lab, which then helped me get this job in this organization. That was not necessarily volunteering, but I started volunteering at Apathy's Boarding in 2018. And in that, for example, I was able to bring in skills that I learned in that into the actual work. And also, volunteering is a really, really great way to get connected with people and the work that you want to do. If you have an idea of like, oh, this is something that I'm curious in, um, then starting to volunteer there. I volunteered in a biennial, for example, which is an art exhibition that happened. And then through that, I was able to connect with an organization that held exhibitions and translate some of those skills into a paid internship. Um, and it also lets you see what you actually like doing through experience.
Right. Well, it's always good for our students to hear, especially from people who are not, as age too far from their age. So it's immediate experience that they could maybe still have the time to accumulate in order to do something similar.
Yeah.
I have a question.
If there's
Yeah.
one thing I would say is to not be shy or afraid to reach out. I've always for like when I was in undergrad, I would be hesitant to reach out to people that I'm interested in. But people are always open to talking. So if there's something you want to volunteer with, I think it's always a great idea to just send a message and ask if there's a way.
Yes. So this is a lesson that you learned.
Yes,
You were
I,
shy in the beginning.
yes.
Yeah. I always was like, trying everything possible, and some things worked, some things didn't, but it's always better to try. And that's what I advise my students in any of my classes. Always try. It doesn't matter if you will, win all the time, but that will give you more experience in working for that thing that you are asking for, that you are preparing for. So every attempt is an experience accumulated.
Mhm.
So the next question is from an American student, William Lehman. Do you think youth in the US would benefit from table talks? How would you recommend those interested in facilitating those talks?
Great question. I think yes for the US and yes to generally anybody. The fundamental idea of table topics, which right now we're in the fourth iteration of roundtable topics, is to um, bring people around you together to have food together while you talk about things that impact your life, things that impact the democracy, and things that are of relevance to you in politics. How I would go about facilitating this is I'll give a bit of an explanation, but we also have a toolkit on our website for anybody who wants to host their own roundtable topics. Um, Basically, in terms of facilitation, there's things to pay attention to and skills to build around how to hold space for a group of people, how to create that space so that there can be um, mutual exchange, even if it's a little bit difficult. One of the ways that we do this is through setting conversational agreements or group norms. So if we, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, we're 10 people. If we were to do a table topics right now, we would start with, first of all, introducing ourselves. So everybody goes around and introduces themselves. So we get a little acquainted. Maybe we would do an icebreaker question. And then we would talk about what is important to us in that space so that we can all have dialogue amongst ourselves. This would be an open discussion of maybe I'm saying, I would like obviously at a base level, like mutual respect. Somebody could be like coming in with curiosity into the space. We could say we all come from different experiences, so we might not have the same opinion or even conflicting opinions of whatever we're talking about. We agree that there's going to be difference, and that's okay. We could say we're not going to tolerate any discriminatory language in our discussion. XYZ. So as a group, we decide what kind of a container we want to build in which we can then have the conversations we want to have. Because yeah, this allows us to feel more comfortable and hopefully safer from the get-go, and also to to feel like we can actually say the things we want to say, and encourage every single person that's in the room, not just those who feel the most comfortable talking publicly, because everyone's different. Um, so that's an example, and then you would structure a few discussion questions and go around that. But I can, it's on our website, but I can share the link for our toolkit afterwards.
Yeah.
There's step by step, a lot of information in it.
Yeah, that's part of the art of public speaking. But the problem is that in the United States, I observed that is one skill that is forgotten. Everybody engages in communication, but they forget to listen. They come just with an opinion and then they defend it to the end of the world. And then they become irate and then they become protective of their own ideas. They become, they will accuse you of having hidden reasons why you are saying something. So it's it there's no more debate. It's just it's even in Latin known, argumento per domo suo. It's an argument for your own house. Um,
Yeah.
so I have another question here, and it's a little bit longer. It's like three questions in one. Um, from another student of mine, Emily Rosenthal. She says, I understand that nonprofit Apathy is Boring works to encourage youth voter mobilization in Canada. Are there any efforts or collaborations between ASB and similar nonprofits in the US? If so, what are they? If not, are there plans to expand the nonprofit to other countries in the future?
There are no plans to expand to other countries. Our mission is really within Canada. There's of course a exchange and partnership sometimes with organizations in other places that do similar work. One of which I was asking my team about this, and one of the things that orgs that they mentioned is called headcount. And actually, then I realized that links to one of Lauren's questions on how can arts be applied to political campaigns better. And through looking at headcount, I saw that they work with musicians for civic engagement. But on our end, we really work just within Canada, and of course are in communication with other organizations in other countries because there's always things we can learn from each other.
And by the way, do you see a job with apathy is boring, something that somebody can keep for their whole life, or after a certain period of time, you have to look for something else because you kind of don't fit the bill anymore? You won't be able to address younger generations, or is it like a springboard towards something else?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't think you would stay your whole life in apathy is boring, both in terms of programming and I think in terms of working. It really is a place where you can come in and learn a lot and then move on to other things that you want to do. Um, and of course, like being in a youth-oriented space, it is important that we understand each other. So it's a very, yeah, it's a big part of our efforts to also recognize that, okay, to be able to genuinely speak to youth, we also have to have that within ourselves. There's no like a real, if after this age, whatever, but it's a great place to work at as a young person to build skills and capacity and confidence, and then take that to where else you want to go in the future, and also make room for others to get to experience that.
Mhm. And do you think this is a position that could be a good springboard for people like you? Do you have examples of people who have worked there and now maybe they work in other nonprofits with the same profile, or maybe are counselors for politicians or something like that?
Many. I wouldn't be able to specifically name, and I don't think I should,
Yeah.
but I definitely know both coworkers and people who have participated in our programs, ambassadors from our RISE program, folks who have joined the BUILD program, who have gone on to take whatever they've started in the work or the programs into much, much different and bigger spaces.
Okay. I like the arms in the air. Okay, so I have a student actually from Palestine, Noor Thabet, who's asking, how do you think youth can be encouraged to explore art and culture as mediums for activism and civic engagement?
Um, this is not in the document, right? I was just keeping
Yeah,
track.
it was new. Look, I put it in the chat. The
Oh, okay.
question. I copied it in
Okay.
the chat.
Um, how do you think youth can be encouraged to explore art and culture as mediums for activism and civic engagement? In so many ways. In so many ways. One of the initiatives that we had in the past was called Artivism, where we would bring in artists on a panel discussion format to talk about um, whatever the topic was. Um, February is Black History Month in Canada, so we had one during Black History Month. We had another one before that. I can't remember when. This is all a few years ago now, so I'm forgetting the details, but specifically bringing in people to talk about issues that impact us on activism and civics from various spaces and communities is really powerful because specifically artists are connectors of people in a way through their craft and um, bringing bringing them into the conversation is we find really powerful. Um, in kind of like the flip side of it, in the RISE program, we've noticed that creative outlets tend to be one that people lean to express or explore certain topics. So one of the first RISE programs, RISE cohorts in 2018, and this was the one that I volunteered for. The group created a project around belonging in Montreal. And what they did was do interviews with very um, specifically minority identities in Montreal and the sense of belonging that they have and the relationship that they have to their city. So what they did was do interviews with a lot of people who are in Montreal and their relationship to the city, and then take work with a photographer to take portraits of everybody and then had an exhibition of all of the portraits along with their interviews. And everybody came, and then we had a panel discussion on belonging in Montreal and how different experiences come into play when talking about that. So that was a really beautiful example. And it was called Je suis Montréal, and it's still going on. They're still continuing the project.
Mhm. Yeah, I
I
was
hope that answers the question. It's such a like a big and a great one that there's always um so many ways to go about it.
right, right. Yeah, I always considered that culture should be a common denominator, should be a subject of discussion because you see, coming as a foreigner in another country, for example, in public speaking classes, I was giving as an assignment to students in interpersonal communication in North Dakota 15 years ago, you know. And when I told them that I'm from Romania, some of them would try to do something as a group project about Romania. And the only source that they wanted to check was the CIA website. And of course, CIA identifies only the bad things about any country. Where are the routes for drugs? Where are the routes for immigrants coming to Western Europe? And, let's ask CIA what's happening at the border with Mexico. Let's ask CIA what's happening with any other nation, you know? So instead of taking into consideration something like that, maybe they should have concentrated on an artist or on a sports figure or on, people that contributed to the common heritage of the humankind, people who invented something. The first inventor of the, uh, you know, engine with reaction for planes was a Romanian who actually invented that in Paris, in France, in the 30s or in the 20s. But nobody knows something like that, and nobody wants to explore that because they concentrate on what they see in the news. And usually, the news in the United States is, let's discuss about the United States. The rest of the world is having problems. If you look at the news in the United States, that's what you see. You never hear something positive about another nation. Okay. I was checking here, and we have one more question, and we're done. But I was checking here. I have a former colleague from my university, but she's from the Republic of Moldova, another Romanian territory. But she's directrice générale in CERHA, a Centre d'écoute et de référence Altami. I understand it's also in Montreal. So, yeah, her name is Doina Sparionopte. But I was wondering if you heard about them because they are
Could you say the name of the center again?
CERHA, CERHA, Centre d'écoute et de référence Altami. And I understand they are based in Montreal.
Okay.
Anyhow, the last question that I have here on the list, let me copy it, is from Lauren Umulor. Is what strategies have you found most effective in engaging youth in political processes, especially during elections?
Um, I touched on it briefly, um, but going to where youth are and communicating with them in a way that is easy to access. So as I said, during elections, we used to have, for example, around the 2019 elections, we had two vote coordinators who worked in the East Coast and West Coast to organize volunteers to go out and canvass or we called them street teams, like going around to different spaces, public spaces to talk to people. That was a huge
Canvassing.
volunteer. Yeah,
Canvassing.
that was a huge volunteering initiative where they would go around to local markets, maybe the weekend farmers market, to malls, to festivals, and table there to talk to people and to ask them questions about the elections coming up, ask them if they're voting, and we would have pledges where people could sign up, a pledge to vote, and bringing in your friends. It's not a going beyond that being a solitary activity to making it a more of a social activity that we all do together. Of course, everyone has their own opinions. So, literally going out to the streets and engaging with people in person was one of the biggest parts of organizing around getting the vote out. Specifically in student spaces, for example, make sure there's polling stations at universities, making sure that we're creating content that's going to specifically catering to some questions that youth are going to have. Like I mentioned, if you live in a province but study in a different province, what happens to you to your electoral card? Where does it go? How can you make sure that you're registered? Creating content so that at every step of the way, there's really clear communication of what are the steps you need to take um, to be able to vote. Similarly, um, creating content on different voting options. There's advanced voting, there's mail-in voting, there's voting the person, remote, what are your rights, for example, in Canada and in Quebec, and I'm sure in Canada too, you have a right to take 3 hours off from work to go vote if the voting is happening on a work day. And so if you're in a work environment where your maybe manager is like, oh no, you can't take time off, you have a legal right to, if there is no other time within the voting time period, you have a legal right to go and vote. So what are your rights? How can you exercise them? How can you be aware of them? And what can we do as much as we can to make sure that that is as easily accessible to you as possible?
Mhm. So, by the way, in Canada, do you have such a phenomenon? Not too many centers for voting, so then there are huge lines to wait to vote. So that could be more than 3 hours staying in line.
Uh, I haven't heard much of that actually. Also because there's advanced voting, a lot of people also utilize that option. Um, that is an issue as a foreign voter in consulates. But within like my neighborhood, I haven't seen that as an issue.
Mhm.
I'm not honestly, I'm not too sure about like all of Canada, but definitely something to think about.
And you were talking about sending people to discuss in markets and, speaking in public to other people, convincing them to go and out and vote or discuss about political issues. I have helped, I volunteer with an organization here in St. Louis, Missouri Jobs with Justice at the end of last year, the beginning of this year, because it was an election year, and when we were going to events or to markets, usually the people in charge over there would come to us and tell us that we need to go to a certain space at the corner of the street, not interfere with their buyers because they are a private entity, and political issues cannot, you know, come against their customers. We are disturbing their customers, So it was like 2 steps to the left. It was the corner of the street. They told me that I have to move 2 steps to the left. So do you have such issues in Canada?
I have not encountered that. Um, I would have two questions. I guess like first, isn't it public space on the street? So
Well,
how could
on
they?
the street, yes, on the street, yes. But if you were 2 steps inside the space considered the market, but you were not at the
Oh,
stall where somebody was selling something, but it was close to
okay.
the tables where somebody was eating, right? Do you
Yeah.
have the same rules? You have to get out of the private space of the market?
I have not heard of that though. I think when it's a specific market that has like specific tables, we have or like festivals, we have been in communication with the organizers before to actually table with them. So I'm not sure how the rules work with if there's a specific festival and there's a specific number of booths and you get allocated a booth,
Mhm,
something like that versus
mhm.
not. Yeah, I'm not too sure
How
on
about canvassing at grocery stores, outside grocery stores like Aldi's, or I don't know if Aldi's exists in Canada, but or
not in Quebec, but maybe in other provinces. We tend to have very different brands in Quebec
right,
and
right.
outside of
But
Quebec.
meaning if you go in the
Yeah,
parking lot, I've seen people volunteering as customers and saying, I'm going to talk to the people inside to chase you out of the parking lot because you shouldn't be talking politics when I'm interested in coming and buying groceries.
I
So
have not heard of this, but I also don't think we have done canvassing in like a supermarket.
not
I
in
think
the
it's
supermarket, outside in the parking lot.
I have not heard of it.
Yeah,
As in like I don't think we've had such an experience.
yeah.
Um and yeah, I think the like in terms of spectrums of ways in which people engage with that kind of interaction, there are instances of um, I just don't want to.
Yes.
And I don't think we so much go like I don't think that's a space in which we push. But we do look for a little bit of an interest in engaging with us
Mm.
because otherwise it's not going to be a very useful conversation anyways.
You were quoting at the very beginning, so we can give some circularity to your speech today from the Greeks, demos kratos, right? But that was exactly for the people speaking in the agora, in the open marketplace. That was the sense of democracy. Otherwise, where would you speak to the people? In a forest, on the street? That would
Yeah.
be really weird to approach people on the street. You have to approach them where they come to feed themselves, where they come to, drink water or other things. because that's what will attract them. There will be a flow of population. Otherwise, where would you speak to them? Only during special events, then you would have just 100th of the population participating in that. So that's what is lost in modern times as compared to the ancient Greek times.
Markets have certainly changed a lot since then.
Yes. Any other questions from the students directly? Well, actually, it's 12:16, so they know that their class is kind of done. So they might have to run to other classes. I thank you very much, Irmak, for being willing to talk to us. And I think we learned a lot from what are the realities of democracy and not-profits like yours in Canada.
Thank you so much for having me. And if any of you have any follow-up questions, you can write to me via email in the one that I shared, but I'll send some links with my email to the professor so we can
Thank you
email
very
it to
much.
you.